Det amerikanska valet närmar sig, med det stiger den politiska risken i världen. Med oss för att diskutera det har vi Donovan, chefsekonom with UBS Global Wealth Management. Political risk is a hot topic for many reasons. I want to make 3 stops on a journey across the world, starting in the US. We obviously have an election coming up, coin toss as of now when we meet. Is this a big risk for markets?
I think there is potentially a lot of risk for markets. There's the short-term issues and the uncertainty about policy coming obviously from different administration, but there's also the longer-term trends. The increased polarization of politics in many countries, particularly in the United States, the rise of economic nationalism, trade tariffs and protectionism and controls on capital and things like that. If we look at this election, because the political position of the presidential candidates is so far apart, there is obviously a risk. But we do need to remember that it's not one election in November. It's over 30,000 elections in the States in November. What happens in Congress is, I think, going to limit certainly the fiscal policies of either candidate, because if we end up with a Congress which is more or less divided, neither Harris nor Trump will get their full fiscal plans through.
Isn't that a wonderful thing for markets, that you will most likely have divided government in some shape or form?
Well, one of the concerns that has been building in markets is the sustainability of the US fiscal position. Now, frankly, I don't think this is going to come to a head in the next 4 or 5 years, but there is a genuine concern that the deficit is not being reined in and so on. Now, to get the US fiscal position back to something that is sustainable, you need to do 2 things. You need to raise taxes and you need to cut spending.
Not going to happen and not going to happen.
Exactly. The Republicans will not raise taxes and the Democrats will not cut spending. So what you've got to do is you've got to bash heads together and bring these 2 parties together. But you look at the partisan divide and the extraordinary divisions that you see in the United States, across all levels of society. Very, very, very difficult to see that happening. And with a divided government, you can't make progress on either side. You just sort of get inertia. And I think that's a bit of a concern, that inertia just means we keep postponing a solution to the rapidly growing level of US government debt.
My view is that we've kind of gotten used to that, and unless something very dramatic happens, some kind of risk shock that alters the attitude of markets, the US can indeed kick the can down the road for another couple of years.
So I think it probably can, certainly for the next presidential term, kick it down the road, but it can't indefinitely. At some point, there will be a shock, and I suspect in the long term, and I'm talking sort of 5 to 10 years here, the financial markets will do that. And being British, the trust debacle, as we refer to it in the UK, where the Truss government comes in with plans and the market takes one look and says no, and quite rightly, because these were entirely unsustainable and they were just not credible plans with the financial community. What then happens, of course, is that the action of the markets forces the government to actually come up with a more coherent and more sustainable fiscal plan. That playbook seems to me what we will see happening in the United States, but again, probably not for the next 4 or 5 years.
Well, if we're talking political risk, and you are indeed British, how's old England doing, and how dire straits is the Prime Minister?
Not at all. I mean, the Prime Minister has got a large majority, and there is no credible threat to his authority for the term of this Parliament.
I'm reading a lot of stories about friendly treatments, gifts from wealthy friends of the Prime Minister, and so on.
So there are certainly issues, but these are not fatal in any way. And the issue is not so much about the gifts, because gifts are allowed. The issue is about the timing of declaration of gifts and so on. There has been communication mismanagement, I think, and that is something that has been addressed. There's been a shake-up in number 10. So I don't think this is necessarily going to present anything more than a distraction. At the end of this month, we'll be getting the budget from Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor. And I think with that, attention will suddenly focus slap bang on policy. We just haven't had anything else to talk about over the summer. So that's why it's been sort of a bit all over the place.
Well, we can always talk about the Middle East. My impression is that markets have been very complacent indeed. This has changed a little bit in the last week, but so far there doesn't seem to be a lot of worry about raw materials, for example, coming up in price.
Yeah. I mean, the role of an economist at times, we have to sort of detach ourselves from the humanitarian crisis and so on and so forth. If you focus on the Middle East, it's all down to oil prices. So the question is, does the political situation in the Middle East threaten oil supply? Yes or no? Up until fairly recently, the answer was actually a fairly convincing no. More recently, with the growing tensions between Israel and Iran, there are questions over whether Israel might launch a military strike against Iranian oil facilities. Clearly, that would be disruptive to a part of oil supply, and that would have economic consequences. But if Israel confines itself to attacks on military facilities, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard or whatever, then that doesn't really change the oil supply consideration in the first instance, and markets will therefore be relatively calm about that situation, relatively calm. Clearly, risks have risen and markets have priced in those risks. I would not say that risks are in the economics.
Thank you so much for stopping by, Paul Donovan.
Thank you.